these birds are producing an egg that's going to go for human consumption every day. So they're making that food product every single day. So there's no withdrawal period, there's no, final kind of end of the flock. It's happening every day.
Welcome to the Feed Science Podcast. I'm Adam Farrenholz, coming to you from North Carolina State University, the feed milling program housed within the Prestige Department of Poultry Science. And on behalf of Wisenetics, I'd like to introduce our guest for today's podcast, Dr. Stacey Roberts, who is the Director of Nutrition with the Versova Management Company. Stacey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
You bet. Absolutely. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the audience, give us a bit of your background and what it is you do now. And also in that, if you would introduce Versova and what the company's role is in animal production.
Sure. So a little bit about me. I did all 3 degrees at Iowa State University. So I came to Iowa State animal science pre-vet. I think some of your previous guests on the podcast have talked about different people's journey into the poultry industry, and mine is probably similar to a number of people who came to the university initially thinking they were going to go to vet school. Obviously, I didn't go to vet school, and I ended up doing a master's and then a PhD here at Iowa State, and got my degree in nutritional sciences and environmental science. So I got some really great opportunities during that time to work not only in the animal science department, but also in the ag engineering department with Dr. Hongwei Shin when he was here, and really enjoyed that work. It was an incredible opportunity, really through my graduate program. After finishing at Iowa State, I got an opportunity to join what ended up being a division of Cargill.
Mhm.
And that moved me from Iowa out to Ohio for 10 years. And really, I don't know, maybe a bit unique about my career journey, I've been focused on egg layer nutrition the whole time. It's pretty much just been egg layers from all my graduate work through the time at Cargill and then where I am today. So when I was at Cargill, I had some really good opportunities to work with egg producers all across the country. Incredibly grateful for those opportunities, and also had some international opportunities as well. Then in the middle of COVID, no better time to kind of throw your life up in the air and move your family halfway across the country than 2020. And I kind of arose from the whole COVID situation here at Versova. And we have, where I'm sitting today is what we call our Innovation Center. We are in the Iowa State University Research Park. And as the Director of Nutrition, I hold responsibility here at Versova for not only development and implementation of the nutrition program, formulation, as well as ingredient procurement, everything except corn and soybean meal. So pretty varied role here at Versova. For those who might not be familiar with Versova, we are a significant egg production company in the U.S. market. We have operations spanning from Ohio to Iowa to the Pacific Northwest. The company's been growing pretty rapidly, both through acquisitions as well as some expansion of our existing production. And our production is a combination of shell egg production as well as liquid eggs. So those would be the eggs that would be broken on site and sold in liquid tanker trucks for further processing into different food products.
Eastman serves veterinarians and nutritionists in agrochemical and animal health industries by helping them select, evaluate, and implement innovative nutritional programs. Eastman works with your team to customize your gut health approach in feed and water. Eastman's approach addresses nutritional and bacterial challenges and finds new ingredient preservation and hygiene solutions. Explore ways to accelerate and innovate your programs. Contact the animal nutrition team at eastman.com.
Excellent. So I think one thing that might be interesting for the audience to hear is as I hear you kind of describe, your journey and then having been in the shell egg world and layer nutrition world this whole time. Um, what are some of the things that you've identified or that I think, the audience might find interesting about what makes doing layer nutrition from a ingredient procurement, from sampling, feed manufacturing, all of those things that would be part of the overall nutrition, envelope different from maybe doing meat bird production?
Yeah, certainly. Having worked with egg layers my entire career, I think they're pretty neat. I think they're pretty amazing what they can do. From a feed manufacturing standpoint, all of our feed is mash feed.
Mhm.
So we're not pelleting, crumbling. We don't have to consider all the things that go along with pelleting feed in our feed mills. As far as the nutrition and formulation piece, these birds are producing an egg that's going to go for human consumption every day. So they're making that food product every single day. So there's no withdrawal period, there's no, final kind of end of the flock. It's happening every day. Um, and another significant part of the nutrition piece is that they have to put that shell on every day. And considering the calcium and phosphorus nutrient requirements to do that, I think is really incredible that that bird can do that process, every day. Certainly, she's going to take a break along in there. They'll have a rest day scattered throughout their production cycle here and there, but just the ability to metabolize that amount of calcium and make that eggshell um, each day is pretty remarkable. The other thing that's pretty amazing about egg layer chickens and related back to our nutrition program is their ability to transfer certain nutrients into the egg. So if you go to the store, you can see some label claims for maybe higher vitamin levels, different fatty acid profiles, your omega-3 enriched eggs. And that's that bird taking the nutrients that we've given her in the feed and transferring some portion of those to the egg where we can take advantage of them for human nutrition. Um, which I think is pretty incredible that we can do that with these flocks of chickens. Um, and the other part is related to the pigments. If you go to different geographies, different parts of the world, you may notice that the eggs are darker or lighter, and that's pretty much directly related to the pigment level in the feed. So if you have a corn-based diet like we have predominantly in the Midwest United States, those yellow xanthophyll pigments from the corn are going to be transferred into the egg yolk. If you get into some regions that are more wheat-based feed, where it doesn't contain those yellow pigments, the yolk color will actually get bleached out and you can have a very pale yolk. And it's not necessarily related to a nutritional change in the egg, but more just a visual of those pigments. So again, it's pretty cool what these birds can do for us and what we can do to help them through the nutrition program.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that gives you quite the perspective when when you go to the grocery store and you're looking at all the stuff and all the labels that are on all the shelves. And one of the things I've always found interesting, and I am by no means a poultry expert. I have learned everything I know about poultry from the faculty here at NC State since I came here about a decade ago. Um, but one of the things I've always found really interesting on the layer side is, as you pointed out, that hen is she's going to make that egg, and that egg is going to be the egg, and it's going to be the egg is the egg is the egg every day because it's obviously got a reproductive purpose. And it's the same thing we talk about for those of us that have had children and gone to the OB appointments, and it's like, hey, you got to consume this calcium because the baby's going to get the calcium it needs, and your body's going to take it from wherever it needs. I always find that interesting when we're talking to folks about the eggs that they want to buy and saying you have to understand what the egg's purpose is, which probably means that the egg is the egg is the egg, and what production system it comes from and all these other things. As you said, there might be some things related to the vitamins or the fatty acid profile that we can do by feeding it, but so much of it is because of what that egg is supposed to be. It's going to be nutritionally what it is no matter where we feed it, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point because that's one of the main reasons why an egg is such a complete source of nutrition for people,
Mm,
because that egg has to contain all of the nutrients, if you think of its reproductive function, that a baby chick would need. And we take advantage of that in our nutrition. It has to have everything inside of it. That baby chick has no other source of nutrition.
absolutely. So from a formulation standpoint and an ingredient procurement standpoint, as well as, I mean, quality assurance, I'm kind of wrapping this all into one, and we can talk about them differently. But how does that maybe change the perspective of the decisions you make in what's going into the feed and what's coming into the feed mill versus something like a meat bird where certain things are going to be metabolized out and it's going to get broken down, it's going to get turned into protein and it goes in the muscle and it doesn't so much matter. It might matter for the health of the animal, but it doesn't so much matter the quality of the ingredient as far as getting it's going to get put into muscle or it's not. And I think this is the same conversation we would have with folks that are making dairy cattle feed. There is a
Yeah.
food product that's coming out that a lot of stuff gets metabolized into directly. That's what the body's meant to do. So how does that change your perspective on how sure you have to be of the ingredients you're procuring and then what's happening at the mill to make sure they're meeting the specs that you formulated to?
Yeah, probably the most significant one is going to be around the fatty acid profile, and I mentioned before, your omega-3 enriched eggs. So if you are producing and marketing an egg with an omega-3 claim, you have to ensure that you've got those omega-3 levels on the front end coming into the feed, so you get those in the egg. Compared to meat bird production, I think I mentioned before, you don't have a withdrawal period. And because of that, we in the egg industry never really used a lot of antibiotics.
Right.
And therefore the antibiotic free discussion hasn't been so significant for the egg industry, because those weren't as widely used. Um, and so that whole piece hasn't been as dominant uh, on our side of things. Certainly we've had more discussion, and our industry has been going to cage free. So that's really where our big discussions have been. How do we manage birds in cage free? How do we feed them in cage free? And what kind of things do we have to do to find success in those systems? And I think as an industry, we've gotten better and better at that. We've been doing cage-free production for a number of years now, and we're figuring out what we have to do to make that successful all around from a management, nutrition, a complete standpoint.
How has the nutrition decisions being made, and I don't know if any of them actually, to be honest, I don't know if any of them have also worked its way into things related to manufacturing, particle size and things like that. How has that changed, or what are the differences between a traditional cage based system, a cage free based system, and then a paddock or a range based system? What are the different feeding strategies that have to be employed to make those systems work for the animals that are in them?
Yeah. From a nutrition standpoint, a lot of the same fundamentals still apply. We need to emphasize the importance of maintaining uniformity, um, of your birds throughout the system, but of all the environment throughout that flock. That said, we lose some of the tools that we had. So, for example, you can't run midnight feedings.
Mm,
Whereas in a cage system, you could add a midnight feeding, perhaps to address some different things. And in a cage-free system, you've worked so hard to train those birds and get them to roost at night. You can't just flip on the lights and feed them in the middle of the night. Um,
sure.
as far as a nutrition standpoint, we have to consider that any birds in a more extensive housing system, like your cage free, any of your free range or outdoor, they're going to have an additional energy expenditure for that additional activity that they're moving around. Maybe they're jumping up on perches and so forth. and also a greater emphasis on bone health
Hmm.
because now they have an opportunity to move around more. And I know there's been a lot of research and a lot of work done to not only evaluate but also optimize bone health in those flocks and make sure that they're not getting injured and having any, keel bone damage, for example.
Sure. Yeah, and I think one of the things that's interesting again there for from maybe our feed manufacturing perspective is so we see a small change in the formulation due to something like bone health, and maybe it's going to change the mineral profile of how much needs to be in the feed or something like that. And then we talk about these very large capacities of feed that need to be made, and all of a sudden that the 0.5% more limestone or something that we need to use based on the formulation strategy, and okay, that's a truckload worth of limestone coming into the feed mill a week that wasn't before. And I always think that those are interesting discussions of how very what might be considered a very small change due to making a production system work down the line can work its way back to the feed mill and the procurement side of, wait, do I have the bin space for this? Do I have the enough hours in the day to receive the ingredients on something that might have been considered something really small?
Yeah, and certainly having a system in place where all of those key people have the ability to work together,
Yeah.
because you're very quickly going to have a breakdown of the system if your formulation and nutrition piece decides to use a half a truckload more limestone, but your ingredient procurement team for whatever reason isn't aware of that change.
Right.
It's just a matter of a few days before that bin runs empty and you can't make feed. So it really emphasizing the importance of having, all those stakeholders working together and recognizing when you need to adjust your procurement, volumes and strategy and so forth to accommodate whatever formulation changes you're making.
Absolutely. But again, my guest today is Dr. Stacey Roberts, the director of nutrition for Versova Management Company. Following that particular track a little bit, I think one of the other really interesting things in the layer world versus the meat bird world is obviously a huge percentage at this point of our meat birds, both chicken and turkey, is integrated at this point, as where the layers, while the companies themselves are doing the housing the birds and the processing of the eggs and a lot of that in many cases, a huge number of them are buying their feed commercially. They're buying them from mills that maybe they do not own, as we would see in the integrated system. So from someone who does a lot of work with on the nutrition side, how does that make your job different when it's one thing to run nutrition when it's all inside my company, and it's another thing to do it when I've kind of got a number of different, I guess we'll call it clientele in this case that I'm working with that maybe can't all do the same thing or don't all subscribe to the same manufacturing philosophies or food safety philosophies or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, great discussion point. And here at Versova, we have both types of systems.
Hmm.
So we have some integrated sites where we're making all of our own feed. We control the entire system, and then we have some other arrangements where it's more of a toll mill basis, and we're working with another feed manufacturer. And I think it's the key is to just have as open of communication as possible to make sure that everybody's on the same page, making sure that you're articulating what your needs are, for that toll manufacturer to make feed to bring into your system. And with the toll mill manufacturers that we're working with, they're very capable. They have those abilities to meet those requirements. So we're able to get feed from more of a commercial mill that would have a similar quality and we can have confidence in, similar to the integrated feed mills that are within our system.
Sure. I'm sure the again, the control that they have and the ability that that they have to make quality feed and all that should hopefully, right, should hopefully be pretty good. Obviously, in some cases in the commercial feed manufacturing world, because they are making feed for sale and they have to keep their customers happy, there is an even greater emphasis placed on some of that customer service kinds of things. One of the things that I always will ask our graduate students that are here at NC State, for example, that are thinking about going out in the nutrition world, is how they think that day to day communication would be different if they said, "Hey, I'm going to go work as a nutritionist for an integrator versus I'm going to go work for a nutritionist in a commercial feed company, or supplying formulations to customers that are commercial feed companies, and how that might be different from their day to day communications with people." Could you maybe speak to kind of what those, how those feel different, or if there are any differences between them?
Yeah, I think there are some differences, but probably a lot more similarities,
Okay.
really. And in my role with Cargill, I was working more as a consulting nutritionist to different egg producers who didn't have a staff nutritionist. And now at Versova, I'm the staff nutritionist, but we have all these different farms across
Hmm.
the country. And so I think of it as, those are my customers. Those are the companies that I'm working with, and I need to understand the people and the processes and the system at all of those sites internally within Versova as I did externally when I was working as a consulting nutritionist.
Sure.
So that's kind of how I think of it, and how those are similar. Being internal and part of the staff, you may have more impact. Now you're speaking and working directly for the decision makers, for the people who are going to follow up or not with the recommendations that you're making, and hopefully you you have more impact in that situation. Whereas on a consulting nutritionist basis, you can come and you can make all your recommendations, and as soon as you leave, they either take it or leave it. And you hope you've communicated that effectively, but sometimes you find that they left it, and that can be fairly discouraging if they, whomever's on the receiving end of your communication doesn't pick up and run with whatever it was you were proposing. But a few comments, especially to the students that are coming out in the industry,
Hmm.
that I would, I guess, advice I would share with them is, don't be afraid of asking questions. You're probably going to feel like they're dumb questions, and if you ask the same question 3 times, you know try to find a way to get over that. In any fear of asking dumb questions or asking too many questions, if you're not fully confident in the situation, whatever the response is, or whatever the story is you're trying to figure out, just keep asking questions. And sometimes you'll find that whomever is answering those questions will realize that maybe they didn't know the full picture, and
Hmm.
your questions have helped them arrive at that. So if there's something that doesn't make sense, whether it's a feed mill process, we might get a call and something failed, and we've got
Yep.
rework feed we need to work through. Just keep asking until it makes sense, because sometimes those details aren't entirely clear to anybody, and your questioning process is going to help get to as much clarity as possible. And certainly we've arrived at a time where video calls are the predominant way of communicating. Certainly within our company, we're geographically distributed. There's not many of us that work together face to face, and we can make that very effective. We've got a chat feature where we can send instant messages, and we do that all day long. We send little one-line instant messages, but there's still a huge importance to getting on the phone and having that conversation where you can talk with the other person and understand what their needs are, and as much as possible, be intentional about that face to face time, not only to get to know the people and the personalities and the communication styles of the people you're working with, but as it pertains to feed milling, to see the mill. to get out
Hmm.
there and apply yourself to the challenge and um, understand what the equipment is and what the constraints are and see it with your own eyes um, is still very important. And I think as we're more distributed, it has to be more intentional to make those things happen.
Absolutely. I'm gonna have them cut that up for me, and I'm gonna use exactly what you just said. As the I think those are some great comments as the feed milling guy, so to speak. That's what we always talk about, and the way that I kind of look at my program is, you know, maybe you're not going to be in the feed mill all the time, but this is why we're teaching you about it so that you can have those good conversations, know what questions to ask, be comfortable asking them. I think that's some really, really good advice. And I also really liked what you said about being willing to understand that maybe you don't know everything. I think we and this I think has gone on forever. We come out of graduate school and at some point we have to be disabused of this notion that we're supposed to know everything. It's like, no, nobody knows everything. Nobody ever will know everything. It's okay to ask those questions. In fact, you're supposed to ask those questions. That does not make you inferior. That makes you intelligent for asking what you don't know. And I think that's hard. And that goes back to that idea too of what I asked about that started all that, which is if you go work for an integrated type of a situation, maybe you have a little bit more control. The people downstream, the folks over at the feed mill, the people in procurement, they're going to have to kind of do what you say, in some cases. As where if you're a consulting nutritionist, of which there are far more of those than the ones that are just in the integrated system, you're going to have to learn how to ask the right questions to get the right information out, or you're going to be providing solutions that the people that you're working with either can't or don't want to put into place.
Yep. And I guess, speaking about the students and coming out of grad school, certainly depending on what each person's area of research was and what their dissertation was, and then subsequently what their job ends up being, um, there's a pretty high likelihood that what you end up doing is not going to be very closely
Yeah.
related to what you studied. And I promise you, when I first started, nobody asked me about my dissertation. Nobody called me up and said, "Hey, Stacey, tell me about all this really great research you've been doing for the last 5 years." I could have talked all day about that, but whatever they did ask me, I didn't know. It felt like every time I picked up the phone, I had to say, I don't know, but I'll find the answer and I'll call you back. And that might just be a process that you have to go through to build that expertise in an area that may be very different from what you come out of grad school with.
Absolutely. No, I say that a lot. That I think one of the biggest things about school in general, and grad school is just an extension of it, is learning how to learn, learning how to
Yeah.
find the information. And as you go through school and go, into an undergrad and then into a master's and into a PhD, and as you are learning more complex ways to do that, but it's still the same idea. And it's not about becoming just an expert on this one thing, but learning how to become the expert on something. And then the next time you have to go become the expert on something, you know the process and you can say, well, I'm not the expert on it, but give me a week and I'll become one. Because I know how to do that now.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're coming kind of here to the end of our 30 minutes or so, before we get into our final few questions, I did want to ask anything in particular that you're really excited about in layer nutrition, things that are people are playing around with that maybe you guys are playing around with to make the process more efficient, make the eggs different nutritionally, make the production systems work differently than they are now. Anything really interesting on the horizon that you guys are excited about?
Yeah, I guess one of the big things we've been working on here at Versova is establishing our internal feed lab.
Hmm? Yeah.
And that's a big project. I expected it to be a big project, and in fact, it's proven to be even bigger than expected. But we had a lab already within the company, more of a
Hmm.
veterinary services lab, and as we assess how to leverage that capability more, we're adding feed testing to that lab. So, all the steps and pieces that have to go into making that successful. That's the journey that we're on here today. That lab is co-located in our innovation center here at the Iowa
Mhm.
State Research Park. So it's very, very functional in that regard. Our formulators here, and I'm here, and our entire lab is here. So that's what we're doing, day to day here at Versova. I think if you think about what's the most exciting thing going forward, there's a lot of discussion on data. And in, I'm going to say, animal ag in general, we've got really good at generating data. I mean, we generate gobs and gobs of data points, and I think we're still trying to navigate what
What
we
to do
do
with it?
with, yeah, what we do with that. How do we integrate it, and how do we make it work for us? And I think that's exciting. Not specifically for layers, but for more broadly for our entire industry as we go, forward into the next, 5, 10, 20 years. How do we leverage that piece of it, the artificial intelligence and the integration of all these data points that we're collecting to make them work for us? And I think if we look forward, the way we work is going to be different as we
Hmm.
find ways to integrate these tools into nutrition and feed manufacturing and egg production.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think we've had that discussion a couple times on different people on this podcast, and it's certainly something we talk about in academic circles and when we go to meetings. Is exactly what you just said. That, oh, we know how to go collect it, we just don't know what to do with it. And I think that the trickiest part there is going to be finding the people that understand what can be done with the data and also understand what is important in our world. And there's not a huge amount of folks that have that crossover, right?
Right.
That have that level of technical expertise on the computer science, the statistics, the data management, and also a nutrition background or a production background, or in my case, a feed milling background. Like, we're talking about unicorn kind of people in that kind of context that can look at that data and say, I know how to analyze it and I know what actually matters. Because otherwise, we spend a whole lot of time trying to train the data analysts on what we do, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, no, I think it's a great point, and I'm with you. I think as we learn and as we figure out what sensors to use and what data, what matters and what doesn't, be some there's going to be some really, we've gotten to the point in animal ag where a lot of the big problems, and this is true with all industries as they evolve, a lot of the big problems have been solved. And so we're getting down to the point where solving the smaller and smaller and smaller, and finding the little bit minute things that make changes in efficiency, but that when all added up, make a really big difference overall. So I think, yeah, I think we'll all be doing that.
It's time for our famous three.
Well, I appreciate the time today. We always close out with a final few questions for all of our guests. The first question is, in your actual area of expertise, so nutrition, layer nutrition, but could just be nutrition in general, are there particular resources that you would recommend to folks of, this is something that, I pay attention to, that's been really helpful to me in my career in order to keep current on what's going on in the nutrition world, how ingredients are changing, and anything like that that you think, hey, everybody should be paying attention to this, or reading that, or watching this, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I would say the one that I have directed the most people to is the report that the Egg Industry Center comes out with. They do an economic report, and it goes over, kind of a general overview of the egg industry. What proportion of it is cage versus organic? And for people who are trying to get introduced to the egg industry, that's just a really great publicly available, completely unbiased report that's available out there. So that's the one I would point more people to more frequently.
Awesome. Awesome. switching gears a little bit, more in kind of your professional career, and personally, moving through that career, any particular resources you think have been really helpful in like kind of overall professional development? We've had people talk about specific books they read or specific people that they've, paid attention to and followed, and gone listen to seminars, anything like that jumps out as this really helped me in my professional development, whether I'd have been in nutrition or anything else.
Yeah, that's a tricky question, and I guess I don't have anything specifically in mind. I am motivated by um, those types of seminars where, somebody stands at the front and says, we can conquer the world, you know.
Right.
So, any opportunity to take some of that and kind of fuel yourself, because going back to this whole thing with video calls and working remotely, it's really easy to sit in your office, behind a screen all day long, and you realize you haven't actually interacted with a person, and especially in the nutrition space, you've pushed a lot of spreadsheets and you've looked at a lot of numbers, and sometimes you need that refresher to really stimulate yourself. So, some of those come from the different industry conferences that are available, but even things at Versova, we have an employee resource group specifically for women.
Okay.
And
Yeah, sure.
I see some of those kind of floating up in with, different companies in the industry. I think those types of things are becoming more common.
Hmm.
And that's really encouraging that there's an emphasis out there, whether it be women or, other groups, but finding ways for, everybody to find their place. Um, that's really important. And through our women's resource group, we'll bring in guest speakers, for example, whether they're from within our industry or even a different industry, and understand, what's been their journey and what's been their successes and their failures. And for me personally, those types of things are very motivating.
Yeah. No, I actually I love that answer. Finding your motivation, finding your reason to grow, to get better, to keep, developing whatever that motivation would be. And it's going to be different for everybody, right?
Yeah.
That's excuse me, that's great. The last question then, and I think it is going to be probably something that's kind of an amalgamation of a lot of the answers you've kind of given during our time here. The people that you've worked with that you find to be particularly successful, done particularly well in their careers, are highly respected. What are one or two things that you see in them, and when you say yes, that's the trait that has made these people who they are today, and that's why they've gotten where they are. That's why they're respected. What are the things that have jumped out to you in your career that are things you've wanted to emulate in order to get to that same place?
Yeah, I think it's I'm going to go to, people that are humble. It's really difficult in a lot of areas of our industry where, you're expected to be the expert. Maybe you're selling something, and
Hmm.
even when I was a consulting nutritionist, you're selling your service, you're selling your knowledge, and you've got to come in and be something great. And it's really hard to step back and just be humble. And I think that's important to keep in mind as I think of who I want to spend time with,
Yeah.
right? As people are asking for meetings, and in my role, they are. There's a lot of different companies that want to be part of Versova's nutrition program. Um, they're the ones that have solutions and can bring those in a genuinely helpful manner. In the end of the day, we all have to make a living, right? We're all selling something. We all have
Right.
to add value, and we all have to justify our paycheck. I get it. Everybody's in that boat. But we also work with each other as human beings. So it's kind of that balance.
No, I think that, yeah, absolutely. Everybody not taking themselves so seriously that they miss out on, the benefits of working with others and learning from others. Absolutely. Well, My guest today has been Dr. Stacey Roberts, the Director of Nutrition for Versova Management Company. Stacey, thanks for spending some time with us today.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Again, this has been the Feed Science Podcast. I'm Adam Fairnholtz from North Carolina State University. On behalf of Wisenetics, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.